On July 17, 2019, a man named Joshua Harris posted to his Instagram account this kind of bland photo of himself standing awkwardly next to a woman who appears to be on a sidewalk. It's like this very cringy photo, but this post made a deafening shockwave through an American subculture. Why, you ask? Well, let me read you the Instagram caption. It starts, "We're writing to share the news that we are separating and will continue our life together as friends." This was, in essence, a divorce announcement. This man, Joshua Harris, was the purity culture influencer of a generation. He literally wrote the book on how dating is immoral and is basically practicing for divorce. How divorce is terrible for humanity. True love waits, and you have to remain pure for your true love. His book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, was published in the late 1990s, and it was a big deal. It became like a mainstream teaching material for the purity culture movement. And if you caught season 1, episode 2 with Tiffany Torres Williams, you already know how devastating being raised in purity culture can be. Not just for the women who learn that everybody's sexual purity is their responsibility, but for men too. Joshua Harris, in the face of his public divorce, has reneged his claims about purity culture and seemed to make a great effort to right his wrongs, even making a documentary called I Survived, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, in which he talked to people who were affected by his role in purity culture. One of those people is Tiffany Williams, who has, since her upbringing in evangelical Christianity, painfully deconstructed her beliefs around shame and sexuality, and happened to run into Joshua Harris, of all people, and you will not believe where and what she did with her great opportunity. She told me about it in part 2 of our conversation about the shame that surrounds our bodies and sexuality, how purity culture proliferates even for people outside of evangelical Christianity, how shame impacts us physically, mentally, and emotionally, and what it means to have a healthy sexual ethic and rewrite this narrative for our kids. In part 2, we talk more about what it looks like to break away from that belief system. And if you haven't caught up on part 1, I recommend catching up there first. Till then, a brief refresher on what purity culture is. It's a religious ideology in which sexual abstinence, particularly for women, is a measure of morality and worth. It's rooted in evangelical Christianity and conservative culture, which idealizes purity and rigid traditional gender roles. I'm Michael Larson, and this is the Modern Hysteria podcast, where I shine a light on the taboo topics of women's health. Because even after I earned a master's degree in health communication, I spent 10 years dealing with chronic illness, feeling isolated, and wondering if I was crazy. Conditions that primarily affect women tend to be under-researched, underdiagnosed, and undertreated, leaving us to wonder if we are the problem. And throughout history, this meant women were everything from burned at the stake to lobotomized to called hysterical. This is modern hysteria. Tiffany, welcome back. I have to tell you, the top question I had when listeners tuned into episode 2 was, okay, where is Tiffany now with her thoughts about purity culture? She's a mom, she's married. What's the deconstruction of it all? So I'm wondering, can you tell us, where are you with your faith?
I think that my faith is always evolving. So this place that I am in time is probably going to look a lot different years from now. But, you know, my husband and I both grew up in fundamentalist Christianity. We both went to church 3 days a week. We both went to a conservative Christian college, and that's where we met and fell in love. I think because we had made a conscious choice to not invest in this sexual paradigm that used guilt, shame, and fear to keep, couples pure until their wedding night, we'd kind of decided that we were giving ourselves permission to just do whatever felt right for us. We did decide to have sex before we got married. We still got married really young. We got married between our junior and senior year in college, and we celebrated our 20th anniversary in August of this year.
Congrats.
Thank you. I think that a lot of wives' tales, right? Like, he's not going to want to marry you if he's already had sex with you. Or why would he buy the cow when he gets the milk for free? But when we got married, I knew that we were getting married because we really loved each other, because we wanted to be partnered, because we complemented each other in so many ways. And it had nothing to do with whether or not we were going to have sex. We started with, we're not going to have other people's expectations on romantic life. We're just going to do what feels right for us. And today we have a very wonderful and fulfilling sex life, and that doesn't come with a lot of the baggage that this purity culture left a lot of other couples with. I have friends who, for the first time, are realizing they can say no to sex.
Yeah,
You've written about that.
that is a huge light bulb moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you've done a really good job of kind of saying that a woman's body is her own. It doesn't belong to her husband. It doesn't belong to her children. It doesn't belong to a culture. And so, with some fumbling, I also had figured that out. And consent is a big part of my sexual relationship with my husband. And that gives me so much freedom to be the person that I want to be, whether that's somebody who does not want to have sex and wants to just get like a really good night's sleep, or whether that's somebody who wants to be as open and experimental as possible.
We use the word empowering when it comes to talking about women and what we want, but I think that's a really concrete example of what empowerment looks like. But what does consent look or sound like now that you know what it really means to you?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with having conversations. I'll give you an example. I had realized just in conversation with friends and things like that lately that I have really foregone pleasure in many areas of my life. So I actually told my husband, we had a conversation like an hour ago about, I said, I really have been neglecting my own personal sense of like pleasure and satisfaction. And that means that we are going to do a getaway before Christmas. We're going to drop the kids off with the in-laws, and we're just going to get away to a different city. We're going to go to a nice show. We're going to go to a nice dinner, and then we're going to do whatever I want to do. And of course, he's always on board for that type of thing. But I think it involves a lot of communication. I think when either of us are curious about something or maybe need some space to kind of figure out like where we're at in our heads with our own bodies and our own sexuality, we just have lots of like really good conversations about that. And I think that, again, that's something that when you have established a culture where talking about sex is bad and thinking about sex is bad, and then you try to move that into a marriage where you're supposed to be this like, vivid, exciting sexual being, those two things can't coexist. They can't
Yeah.
coexist in one body. And so, again, I'm really grateful that sexuality within marriage or within, any type of relationship that is intimate in that way, it needs to involve a lot of communication. And I'm glad that we have that. And I hope that people, if they haven't had that their entire marriage, I hope that they're willing to keep trying. And whether that means sex therapy, whether that means a group of like-minded friends where you're trusted enough to talk about that type of thing, whether that means investing in podcasts like this, I hope that people are willing to pursue that for themselves, even if you are starting from a really good place.
And what is on the other side of that? Once people do start to do the work of learning how to communicate, what happens then? Like, what can they look forward to?
Well, I think the hard journey of reshaping yourself from a misshapen sexual ethic, a lot of that is breaking down trauma. I mean, we had talked about how even people who have not experienced sexual trauma still have the responses of somebody who has experienced sexual trauma if they've grown up in purity culture, if they've grown up in
Yeah.
this paradigm that uses shame. And so I belong to groups of people online that have deconstructed their faith. And that kind of means tearing down what they grew up believing while still keeping a relationship with their core beliefs, usually a belief in God. And some people, I will say some people deconstruct to the point that they no longer believe in God. Some people
Mhm.
deconstruct to the point that they still believe in God, but they don't go to church anymore. So deconstruction is not one thing. But I would say if you have allowed somebody else to tell you who you are, you have some healing to do once you start to get out of that. That's a really hard, it feels like an existential crisis, right? Like everything feels different than what I grew up believing. And that can be really hard for people. But on the other side of that is a belief that you get to determine rules for yourself and your own life based on your own connection with yourself and your own connection with a higher power. It's such a beautiful outcome for such a hard journey. So I think, you know, in a broader sense, there are lots of people out there who are deconstructing, who are questioning a lot of things for the first time. Maybe they don't like a politician deciding what they get to do with their body and making decisions that should be between them and their doctor. Maybe they're seeing those kinds of things for the first time and they're starting to ask questions. It's a very hard and long and arduous journey, but it's also so fulfilling to get on the other side of that and say, actually, I know what's best for me. Actually, I know what's best for how I raise my children. Like, making those kinds of decisions for yourself is incredibly edifying. And it's something that a lot of us who grew up this way are out of practice with, to be honest.
And since both you and your husband grew up in this evangelical culture, are you having to rewrite the script for how you raise your kids? You have a daughter and a son. So what does that look like when you're talking to them about their bodies and sex? And how are you figuring out what to say to them?
I love that question. I really do have to think very hard about these things. I have a son who's 12. He's going to be 13 in a few weeks. And I have a daughter who is 10. And so one of the things that I want to establish with both of my kids is the power of consent, that no sexual experience should ever be without consent, that nobody owes anybody else the right to their body. I want both of my kids to hear that, but for completely different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I want my son to hear that and to understand that, so that when he hears things like his wife owes him sex because they got married, or that a woman owes him something sexual because he took her out on a date, or whatever, he knows the truth. I want my daughter to hear that so that she never feels like she owes somebody something that makes her uncomfortable. Whether that's a hug from a relative that she doesn't really know, whether that's an expectation from a date that she goes on, whether she's married. I want her to know that consent is valuable, that intimacy is the greatest gift that she can give someone, and that she gets to choose what that looks like. I would say, first of all, that is the most important lesson that we teach. And then demonstrating that there is not shame around the different stages that your body is going to go through. And then another thing that I think families with a healthy sexual ethic have established is that you don't have to talk to us about everything, but you can come to us about anything. There's going to be things that, you know, they're going to get embarrassed and they're not going to want to talk about, but we are making ourselves available to them for that reason. And right now it's very cute and innocent, and it's them saying things like, you know, hey, what did it feel like when you had a crush for the first time? Because I think I might have a crush on someone. Or my daughter loves to tell people that she is bisexual. We've always been really open about there just being like other people whose bodies are different than ours. We have trans friends. We have friends who are gay, queer. I do encourage her to maybe not say bisexual, because that implies some sort of like sexuality and she's 10, but say like, I find guys and girls attractive, you know?
Like, does it feel redemptive to you, or how does it feel when you get to see your daughter at 10 being able to talk about these things without shame?
I do feel incredibly empowered by the fact that she feels comfortable enough that like what is normal for her is that like just anybody can love anybody. And that is so different from the way that we were raised and the lessons that we were taught. So I'm very proud of that fact.
I love how you're looking at that with a sense of curiosity rather than feeling like you have to control or have them act or react in any particular way. I think the people who I'm close to who grew up in the evangelical church, steeped in purity culture, they had those urges that are just part of human nature. And we're told, well, if you act on those urges, like masturbation, that you're going to burn in hell at a temperature 1,000 times hotter than fire. And for a small child to hear that, 6, 7, 8 years old, I don't think they know how to process that. But also just, it seems like it would doom them to a cycle of shame and confusion about something that's completely natural. And it must feel freeing to be able to rewrite that dynamic with your children, if that was something that you experienced.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I've had to really think about what age appropriate messages are for my children. And so like, I'm not going to let a 4-year-old watch Saving Private Ryan, for example. But why were we letting them go to church and hear about hell at that age? Like, why were we letting them believe that they were going to burn in a fire for eternity when like so young that we would never introduce that message in a different way? And so I think that one of the things that I've had to be really mindful of is that I'm having conversations with my kids that are appropriate for their age about sex as well and about romantic relationships. My daughter especially has always been incredibly interested in romance and romantic relationships. There was even a year, it was the year of COVID, that we homeschooled. And so she wasn't seeing a lot of other kids, but she would go outside and get a stick, like a big, long stick that's like the size of a body and say, this is my boyfriend. And so I always was kind of like, okay, how do I temper her interest in this in a healthy way, but like not shame anything for her, like not even shame her interest in having a boyfriend. It's just been something that I've had to really do some deep thinking about. I think something else that I just want to say, like before we move on from this, is that even for people whose relationship with sex looks a whole lot different than mine and my 20-year monogamous marriage, it's not going to be healthy for them if they look at other people as like a cat scratching post. If they use other people for their bodies, you have to find a way to notice and appreciate the soul of a person. Find a way to see people as something other than just a vessel for your sexual pleasure, because sex is a very intimate activity. And so I think that there are ways to do that for sure, but there's not ways to do that if you're only interested in using people. I don't encourage that. And I would never want my kids to have that kind of relationship with someone on either side of it.
And I think we do that without even realizing it, just because we don't, especially as women, learn what should it look like to have a fully formed, I don't even think I have the language now to describe it. That's why I'm having future guests on to talk about women's pleasure and permission, because what does it look like for a woman to have a fully actualized healthy sex ethic was something that our therapist told us, and me particularly, was that being intimate with your partner is not about a race to the finish to orgasm, because it starts with emotional intimacy, especially for you. And like in part one, I think you were talking about what is the metaphor that women are a crock pot and men are a
microwave.
Microwave. I was going to say air fryer. Well,
maybe
we can make it work. And that really was a light bulb moment for me, because I thought, what is the point then? It's to be close with someone. And I guess maybe I'm still figuring it out, like feel a next level connection with someone, like spiritual and trusting, and that you need to feel safe physically, mentally, emotionally in order to do that. And neither of us learned that. So just having someone to tell you something that replaces those mistaken beliefs is so powerful. And so my next question, Tiffany, is what alternatives to purity culture do you instill in your family culture?
Well, one thing that came up for me when you were talking, this is going to sound so weird, but I'm just going to dive in. So a Mormon influencer taught me how important my own sexual pleasure is, and that might be something that I'm experiencing separate and apart from my own husband, or a 2-person sexual encounter.
Do tell. This seems ironic. It's not the messenger that I expected.
Right. This was a few years ago. Anne Helen Peterson, who's a writer, wrote about these Mormon influencer twins. I think they went to BYU, and one of them was getting married and one of them wasn't. And the one that was getting married all of a sudden started like hawking vibrators on her social media. And when she got pushback from the Mormon community, who was most of her audience, she just kind of said, you know what? My fiance and I have led very pure lives. We have not explored, and I want to know what my own sexual pleasure is so that I can teach him. And I can't do that if I don't experiment with my own pleasure. And it was just such a like aha moment for me. Like, wait a second. We have to know what that is for ourselves before we can invite somebody else into that experience and expect them to bring us pleasure. And so I think that for a lot of women, inside and outside purity culture, we just haven't spent enough time with pleasure. We have not given ourselves permission to make the brain space for it, because that's a big part of it. We have not given ourselves the ability to push back when we get, called out for whatever. I think I used the word Jezebel on our last podcast.
Yeah. I got feedback from listeners who said, yeah, like I've been called that. Yeah.
Women in general tend to take a lot of flack for doing anything for ourselves. So whether that's a shopping trip, a nice restaurant meal with your best friend, doing nothing for a while, like we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but also society puts pressure on us. And so you can understand why there's this lack of education about sexual pleasure and how important it is, and how sometimes you're just not going to have like a great sexual experience with somebody else if you can't even have one with yourself. I think that one of the things that's like a flip side of purity culture is really reclaiming pleasure. I want more women to do that. I think that, just again, like not shaming and leaving space for exploration is what I would want for my family. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. It did. And as you were going through the deconstruction of all of these lessons, was there any guideline for you? Were you looking to someone else? Because you talked about how you were reading these books, like you mentioned, Josh Harris's I Kissed Dating Goodbye on part 1. So were you finding books at the bookstore about deconstructing religion, or were you doing it, you're just kind of like raw dogging this, or you like go on Reddit, or like what did that look like?
I definitely was looking to other influencers who were also, came from the same culture that I did, and then we're also deconstructing it. And so there's some that are like really funny and satirical online, and then there's some that are like more serious. And I think that in doing all of that exploration, I actually reconnected with Joshua Harris, the writer of I Kissed Dating Goodbye, in the sense that I started following him online. Back in the day, he wasn't online. Nobody was online. Online wasn't really a thing, 1997 or whatever, or much of a thing. But now we have these people who are sharing their stories, as influencers kind of on the other side of things. And so I'd found his Instagram, and I'd been following it. And, now as a person 20 years into the future, I saw that he had married and written a book with his wife. And then years later, they got divorced. I saw that he was a father. I saw all these things, and I saw his apology. He essentially apologized to all of the people that he had hurt with that book. He saw the ways that it was wrong and recanted everything, basically, and said,
Wow.
this not only hurt me and my own relationship with the woman who would become my wife, and my relationship with my children, and my relationship with God, but I hurt a generation of people. And for that, I'm sorry. I think he worked very hard to get his book. You can't buy it anymore. Like, you have to find it in a used bookstore. But so he worked really hard to get his book off of bookshelves. And he kind of, I don't think that he like shrunk back from the spotlight. I think he used the spotlight in a different way. So the probably most ironic thing that has ever happened to me is that last Thanksgiving, 2023, I had gone to Vancouver. My family had driven over there to visit family members for Thanksgiving. And then we all decided to go to Powell's the next day. Powell's is one of the largest bookstores in the world. It's in Portland. It takes up a whole city block. I didn't go there with an agenda. I was kind of like, I'll get some Christmas presents and, maybe get a book or two for myself. But I was in the psychology section of Powell's, which is right next to the sex section. And I look over and I see Joshua Harris in the sex section.
Stop. Were you like, is this a hologram? It's an apparition.
Pretty much. Like, here's a person who's lived in my head for one reason or another for a large chunk of my life. I know exactly what he looks like. I recognized him immediately. Like, I knew exactly who he was. So I kind of did like this thing like that you do where you go, okay, now what? Do I say something? Do I try and like insert myself in this man's like book shopping experience, essentially?
Did you?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I went over to him and I said, hi, my name is Tiffany. I read your book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, whenever I was in high school. And I just wanted you to know that I'm really thankful and proud that you recanted everything that you said in that book, and that you have used your platform now for helping other people deconstruct the things that they used to believe, and then establishing a more healthy relationship with sex and romantic partners. And he said, oh my gosh, isn't that so funny that you're now meeting me in the sex section of Powell's?
Yeah, I'm glad he recognized it too. And I respect him so much for going to the measures that he did. And good for you for having the presence of mind to like, say something that poignant. in that moment.
We kind of had like a quick conversation about ways that we've changed, but then also like the things that purity culture excluded, like all of the LGBTQ community and how we can support them and protect them. And, you know, kind of just had like this quick conversation about like, look how far we've come. Let's keep. And then I asked him to add me actually on Instagram.
Okay, that's the move. So I also want to say that I have enormous respect for people like you, some of my best friends who have deconstructed their religious upbringing. My husband, I have great respect for him. People like Josh Harris, not only deconstructing privately, but then recanting, redacting his whole brand, basically, and saying I was wrong and taking responsibility. But I have enormous respect for anyone who is able to ask those hard questions and take a personal inventory of maybe these foundational beliefs are not what I believe anymore. That's got to be one of the hardest things to face, and then to figure out a path forward as a parent to do it differently without a roadmap, really doing it from scratch. I just want to say, I think that takes enormous guts, and I admire it so much when it feels like the rug must be pulled out from under you when you start questioning these things that you were taught were the truth. It's so admirable.
Thank you for saying that. I haven't always been as smiley about it. It hasn't always been pretty. In fact, I think I described it one time as leaving a toxic family. You know that they're toxic, but they're also all that you've ever known. And it's very hard to know what comes after that. So I know that your husband and my backgrounds like parallel so closely. Yeah. And I think that it takes a lot of patience to come alongside somebody on that journey, especially when it's not where you started. I mean, my husband and I have kind of journeyed together, but you guys started in a different spot, and that it takes so much patience. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of him for putting the work in. So.
I hadn't thought of it that way. It helps to be curious about it. Like, and I am endlessly curious about it. I have the opportunity to be more intentional about noticing there are things that we experience differently. Both my parents left organized religion. My mom's European, so she didn't grow up in this culture at all. And we were raised with like PBS and National Geographic. Those are God, not really. But we were just so, my parents wanted us to be a blank slate spiritually. And so I have the benefit of kind of looking at it from truly the outside. And anyone listening to this who is at least one partner deconstructing, it can be messy. It takes time. Obviously, you guys are 20 years in, and it's such a testament to good partnership, making it through earth-shaking deconstruction of like foundational beliefs. That must make a good partner to get out on the other side. Okay, Tiffany, I want to know, do you have your bag near you?
Oh, I do.
Our recurring segment on Modern Hysteria is What's in Your Bag? Always loved those spreads in celebrity gossip magazines that I felt guilty about reading as a teenager.
Yes.
Like, what's in your bag also says so much about who we are as people. What are we carrying with us metaphorically, physically? So, Tiffany, can we know what's in your bag?
Okay. First of all, this bag is enormous. This is not a normal person bag, but I have a lot of baggage, Micah. I have a lot that I need to carry around.
Physically, literally. Also, you're a mom. I think our bags get bigger.
Mom. Exactly.
Yes.
But my favorite thing that's in my bag is lipstick, because I feel more empowered when I wear lipstick, and I don't know why. But if I ever need like a boost, if I'm about to do something that requires bravery, I've got lipstick in my bag in various shades. I need like a good rain umbrella. So I have like a really compact umbrella, because like this hair, right? Like we don't want it to get Texas big in the humidity, and we don't want it to fall flat. So we got to protect the hair.
Okay, but that begs the question, is it true the bigger the hair, the closer to heaven?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
For sure. Yes. If you go down to Texas, there will be some really good examples of that. Like the most holy women have really teased it up pretty high. So
yes.
They've already got a jump on us, Micah.
They do. No, I have no hope. I'm good with that. I think the company in hell will be quite exciting.
It'll be quite fun, yes. And then I have a myriad of pens and highlighters, which this is another habit. You gotta just always have something to write with. So those are the things that stay in my bag.
Portrait of a woman. She's got great hair. She's got her empowering lipstick. I love that an intentional bit of lip color can truly make you feel like you're showing up in a different way. 100% believe that. And she's got her writing utensils because she's going to write her story. Thank you for letting us look in your bag, Tiffany. And thank you for opening up and telling us about this really taboo part of our culture and how it infiltrates not just evangelical households, but those of us outside of it, and for shedding a light on this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and talk about purity culture. I think that the more people understand it, they can fight against it. And so that's really my goal. And you're helping
Yes.
people do that. So thank
When
you so
we know
much.
better, we do better.
Exactly.
Follow Tiffany Torres Williams on Substack, on Instagram, and look out for a future episode on permission, pleasure, libido.
Awesome. Yay.
So thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Modern Hysteria. If you like what you heard and you're listening on Spotify, please consider giving a 5-star rating or leave a comment so we can reach even more people. We've got upcoming episodes on birth trauma, chronic illness, emotional abuse, narcissism, postpartum support, libido, body dysmorphia, and so much more. I'm Micah Larson. Come back next time for Modern Hysteria.